So no.
I heard a term the other day called spermageddon, right? And then
Yes.
I looked into this in the British Medical Journal that since, when was it? 1973, sperm rates have declined by 52%, right? And this is in Western countries. So this is in North America, Australia, New Zealand, Britain. What's the story?
Very good question. This is something that's been covered in many different ways and avenues. And it's interesting that you said spermageddon, because I actually attended a seminar entitled that back in 2020, literally just before COVID had hit. And the doctor was going through all the stuff about sperm and why the change. And exactly why Western countries. So as best as we can gather, and this is also covered in a book called Countdown by Dr. Shanna Swan, I should say. And she was looking at the difference between different parts of the world and why there'd be a difference in the sperm. And what they found is that there's more exposure to environmental chemicals. If you're in a more industrialized or developed country, you're usually exposed to more. You're also, generally speaking, more stressed and consuming more processed foods by comparison to someone who's maybe, living more in the countryside and isn't exposed to, all the toxins and stuff that would be just with pollution, just normal stuff every day.
But then, is that avoidable?
To an extent. So with sperm testing that I would do with clients, or obviously send them off to get performed, but then trying to figure out how to address it afterwards. You would look at things like toxin exposure that would come through in the urine. So you can do urine tests that are very effective actually at picking up on any metabolites that they're not clearing properly or maybe clearing too much of. So where are they coming from? So first things to look at would be the type of work you're doing. So if a guy is, let's say, a joiner or a plumber or carpenter, any kind of DIY work, or indeed engineering, even chemical engineering, if they're not wearing the right protective gear, which many of them don't, as I've had those conversations with them, then they're more likely to get exposed, and then it's going to be harder for their body to clear it out. But equally, I've seen cases where I remember a guy from years ago who was desk bound, like he was just, kind of corporate work. But I remember just to speak with him, he had a lot of, hair gel products. I remember noting that and asking him about it and saying, so, would you use that every day? And he said yes, and in a lot of those products would be aluminium. And when we did his toxin screening, his aluminium was off the charts. But why? Loads of people use those products. Then when questioned further about his diet, lifestyle, daily life, we realised that he thought this is normal now, by the way, to have essentially very loose bowel movement each evening. He thought it was just his body's way of clearing out. He didn't realise that actually that was him having an intolerance to wheat. So the sandwich every day that he was having for lunch was causing a reaction in his gut, which just didn't suit him. And as a result, his body was less efficient at being able to clear the aluminium out. And that's why it accumulated in his body.
But how does your stool affect your sperm?
Because it's more the aluminium that would. So the aluminium was accumulating.
Yeah.
But actually your stool can, in the sense that, if we're getting off topic slightly, but if you're talking about absorption and assimilation of nutrients, then of course, if you've got any problems within the gut, that'll have a direct effect on the sperm.
Yeah.
Everything links.
But when people ask each other how they are, people will talk about everything but their poo.
Of course.
It's
not dinner party conversation.
No. So, but if you had a dog and your dog was having diarrhea all the time,
you bring them straight to the vet.
Of course.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
Or if they've had the opposite problem, you do the same. But things like poo or erectile dysfunction or sperm count, people don't talk about them, especially fellas.
Yeah.
Let's say you're at a dinner party and you might say, okay, I'm not going to eat that thing because I have high cholesterol. You'd happily do that.
Yes.
But you wouldn't say, I'm not going to eat that because I have a low sperm count. I need to watch.
Never. So that's the problem. You're absolutely right. And when you consider that, fertility issues are affecting at least 1 in 6, if not higher, and it's 50-50, like across the board, depending on which papers you look at, it might say 40% male factor, 40% female factor, and 20% unknown. They might put it like that, but essentially it's 50-50 across the board, but it's not treated that way. When I am dealing with couples where, one partner has sperm, the other has eggs, and they're going in for a consultation, I will regularly hear that the way the clinic is treating them, they'll ask all the questions to the person with eggs. They won't ask anything of the person with sperm. It's more like, your name, date of birth, okay, grand. Have you had a semen analysis? Moving on. There's no discussion really about it until they're far along the path. And frankly, are heartbroken, have spent thousands on fertility treatment that could have been avoided if they just did more comprehensive checks of the sperm first.
Yeah. You see, the thing is, as you were chatting there in the kitchen, you had kids earlier in your 20s. And most people now are having kids at my age, which is I'm 41. Yeah, I'm nearly 42. So I know people that are going through IVF and having challenges having kids. But whenever there is a challenge, people will just assume it's the woman.
Always, yeah.
And even if it is the fella, she'll might even take the...
Still take the brunt of
the brunt of it,
responsibility,
exactly. The brunt of it. Is that changing?
Slowly, very slowly. I mean, I'm just thinking of some great pages that I follow on Instagram, like Test Limited, and the Man Cave, Kev, who does this great show, the M&M show, which gets on a group of fellas to talk about sperm health. So it's slowly changing, but not fast enough. I mean, I've been at this 18 years, and I've watched over that time frame, given what you were talking about at the start with the drop in sperm count, the change in semen analysis parameters. So when I was initially starting out, it was about 40 million per milliliter was the kind of threshold. Now it's dropped to 15 million per milliliter. Like, how much lower is it going to get? Yeah. And that's based on, because if you look at reference ranges, that's based on what's the norm. So if 100 people, if that's the norm for them, well, then that'll become the standardized reference range, but it doesn't mean it's optimal, doesn't mean it's healthy. So it's a huge problem, but unfortunately still is viewed. And if you look at anything in terms of the targeting, like marketing online to do with fertility, it's all targeted at women. And in fact, I only have to look at my following. I have 98.5% female followers, or those who identify as female. So this idea that, you know, how can it be 50-50 if the guys aren't getting involved in the conversation? And then it has a further, and I suppose a more insidious impact, which is that because it's not talked about, if you then bring up the fact that, okay, listen, there were some issues with the sperm, it can hit them so hard. It can be really traumatic for them. Because of, you know, rightly or wrongly, obviously I'd argue wrongly, this association with sort of masculinity and stuff to do with sperm health, which is of course nonsense. It's just like anything else. It's just like any other biological issue. You know, when we talk about fertility, I often advise people, I say, listen, if you had to go in for a hip replacement, you'd be saying to people, oh yeah, I've got a gammy hip, I've got to get a hip replacement. You wouldn't think twice about that. Or even talking about cancer. We are more comfortable talking about cancer than we are talking about fertility issues. Yeah. And it's just crazy. It's wild to me because it's the same thing. It's just a biological issue. But yet for some reason we internalize and personalize it. We make it our fault. You know, we give it that kind of context, which of course is coming back to probably, you know, Catholic country, shame, guilt, everything that comes when you're talking about fertility. Obviously it implies sex, so that's why it's difficult for people to talk about, because it just feels too intimate and personal.
Yeah, it's like you said in your TED talk, how when you're a young woman, people will say, don't get pregnant. And when you're a fella, I remember my mum would say to me, remember, carry a packet of 3, as in condoms, and so don't make sure a woman doesn't trap you. I'm like, what would she be trapping? I have nothing. I'm 17 years old. Exactly. I'm a real catch. Yeah.
That's so true though. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what we were taught, and particularly because I'm the same generation as yourself. I'm 42. So I'm now, it's quite interesting, obviously, having, you know, worked in this field over the last 18 years. I've gone from being sort of one of, at the younger tail end of it, to now I'm at the older end, you know, in terms of fertility lifespan, that I can see, you know, most of my clients now would be younger, who I'd be dealing with, although I still work with plenty of people in their 40s. And it's really important to state that I've seen many people conceive, not just with IVF, but non-assisted with their own eggs, well into their 40s, so 43, 44, 45, it is possible. But it's just, unfortunately, the messaging that's out there is so negative. The focus is on eggs only, ignore the fellas, ignore the sperm. So then that can leave both partners diametrically opposed from each other. And that's really hard in the relationship, and really hard in terms of making progress. Because then they have that frustration of thinking, God, if I'd known this sooner, then I wouldn't have wasted all this time, you know?
And even when, like, again, other couples that I know have one child, they experience, it's called secondary infertility. Because, and I don't know how much of a factor this is, but I do know that when you become a dad, you become so unhealthy. Naturally. You know, it's there's actually a thing called COVID syndrome. I think it's sympathetic pregnancy.
Correct.
Where men will develop pregnancy symptoms like their wife or partner. Now, I don't know if that's just through proximity or similar lifestyle or what it is exactly, but I coach dads and I regularly say to them, like, your missus is having a baby, you're not having a baby, all right? When people say, like, I know it's a bit controversial, but like, oh, we're pregnant. It's like, no, you're not pregnant. She's pregnant.
She's pregnant, yeah.
So she's gonna, generally speaking, fulfill a role which you can't fulfill, right? And therefore, you maybe have another role that you can fulfill. So, say for example, I will go. When she's pregnant, I'll go to the shop and get her a cream cake, or if she really wants to, she's craving a cream cake, but I won't get one for myself, right? Because, or I might have a bite of hers, because I think to myself, I need to be like. If she needs to be really emotional, because it's so important that she is for our other kids, that she's able to look after them and she knows what they need. But I need to be a bit more how can I say this?
Like the provider, assertive, stable.
But a bit more like, right, let's do this now, and whatever.
Yeah.
But we were chatting about this last night, how we need each other so much to provide those two roles.
Yes.
Now, this obviously some women can have more masculine traits and some men can have more feminine traits. But when you become a dad, you have to remember that you're still a human, you're still an animal, you still need to move, you still need to look after yourself the same way you did when you were looking for a woman. Like when you're a young man, a big part of your drive is to find a woman, obviously.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So you're like, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to dress a certain way, or try and achieve well in my career so I can attract someone. And then once you have the wife and the kid, you start like, you go into lockdown mode, you know, like wearing your tracksuit every day and shower every other day, and you know, you're not going to the gym because you're like, oh well, I have a woman now, and what do I go to the gym for? And this is a big mistake, a huge mistake.
Or simply just due to being busy, as you rightly said. So secondary fertility struggles, or indeed tertiary as well. Really important to outline that. I've seen people who tertiary for their third child. Okay. So people who desperately want their third or indeed fourth child. So it's really important to say that, because so often I see people who might have attended a fertility clinic being told, sure, you're lucky to have the one. Sure, at your age. Do you know what I mean? Like putting people down for wanting to extend their family, which no one has the right to do. It's totally up to the individuals what they want to do about their family size. So with secondary fertility issues, one of the mantras that I always remind people of is that prior paternity is no guarantee of current sperm health. And I mean, that should be emblazoned probably as on a billboard somewhere, because people just aren't explained that. So I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've seen who've attended and spoken with consultants at clinics who said, oh, well, you have the first one, so it's clearly not him. Like, that's literally how they phrase it. We'll move on to, there must be something going on inside. Maybe it's because you had a C-section, so there's some problem anatomically. Maybe it's your hormones. Maybe it's your age. You're older now than you were before. And I've had women being told this who are in their 30s, you know? So, like, not well into their 40s or anything like that. So this idea that sperm just has everlasting quality is nonsense, because it's made afresh every day. So it's actually far more vulnerable, far more exposed to damage than a woman's eggs are, because we've had our eggs since birth. So in fact, since in utero. So therefore they have to be very well protected. The sperm, on the other hand, because they're made afresh approximately every 74 days, you normally give sort of the 3-month window in terms of prep. That's why it's so important to prepare properly when trying to conceive. So because of that time frame, whatever happens in a guy's diet and lifestyle, everything from being sick, you know, so obviously with, you know, the pandemic, or it's come back a bit in the last few months, people would have said, oh yeah, I had it again. Well, did you have a fever? In other words, raised body temperature, because any heat damages the sperm. So there's lots of things. So anything that happened for the 3 months prior will impact the resulting sample. And we also know from the research that advancing age affects the sperm as well. It's for guys too. It's not just for women. So it's just really important to understand that, because I have seen this one thing waste so much time for people, where they're just going down the rabbit hole with doing all the investigations. The poor woman's being poked and prodded and having every blood test investigation imaginable. And meanwhile, they, if at all, they might have done the semen analysis. They haven't done what's known as a sperm DNA fragmentation test, which is helping you to identify the actual genetic quality of the sperm, whether there's been any damage done to the sperm. So just to be clear, it's not that you're carrying a genetic marker through. It's not the same as a different test called a karyotyping test, which would be a blood test, which is for things like ruling out cystic fibrosis, stuff like that. But the DNA fragmentation test, what's happening is there's damage occurring to the DNA of the sperm when it's lying in wait. So when it's actually sitting in the epididymis before it's used, that's when the damage can occur. So even things like, it's called the 1-day abstinence protocol. So making sure that ejaculation is happening like at least every second day is important, so the sample is fresh, as therefore there's less likely to be damage. But it's just, if people could understand how many things there are, how many steps to take, it's not just about avoiding wearing light, tight underwear or something like that, because that's usually all people are told, and avoid fizzy drinks. I mean, that's all well and good for sure, but it goes a lot deeper than that, because a person might have secondary health conditions, might be on certain medications, might have experienced, trauma to the groin as a child that could have impacted the function of the testes. So yeah, there's a lot that has to be looked at.
So if you're married or you're in a relationship that for a long time, and let's say, hypothetically speaking, you have sex once a week, like my friend Kelvin Doyle does. No, I'm joking. Should a fella then masturbate in between?
Correct. Yeah, very important. And frankly, if you're actively trying to conceive, once a week is not going to cut it. And again, this is something that's embarrassing for people to talk about, but if you're talking about trying to conceive non-assisted, so you're not going for IVF or something like that, although I'd still argue that it's important for connection as a couple, in intimacy, to still have that time together, because sometimes I think people, if they've been trying to conceive for a long time, and obviously that can impact that side of the relationship, they just go off having sex. They just decide, well, it's fine, we're doing IVF now, so we just don't even need to do that anymore. And that can be very destructive. So you have to be mindful of that. But if you're trying to conceive non-assisted, then from the time the period is finished, so let's say from around day 5, you really want to be trying to conceive every second day, like day 7, day 9, day 11, maybe daily in around the time of ovulation, if the woman knows when she's ovulating, because that's key, because the sperm can survive for at least 3 to 4 days. And I've seen cases where it can actually survive up to a week. I had that proven in one case just because of, she knew exactly when they tried, because her husband had gone away for work, and we knew from scanning exactly when she ovulated. So we knew it had been a week. And she got pregnant on that cycle. Whereas the egg, once it's released, can only survive 12 to 24 hours. That's it. Game over. So this idea of, timing with ovulation predictor kits, smiley face, okay, must try to conceive now. That's a bad idea, because you want to actually have the batches of sperm lying in wait for the egg, rather than trying to time it to when the egg is released. Yeah.
So therefore, as long as the woman's up for it, it's ideal to have sex as much as possible, I assume, as frequently as possible.
Yes, as frequently as possible. Certainly in the kind of late follicular phase, coming into ovulatory phase, from, like I said, from about day 7 up to could be day 18, 20, dependent on when a woman is ovulating, because some ovulate a bit later, some a bit earlier. Yeah,
and that brings me to the point of like libido for fellas, because obviously it's going to differ depending on the man's character and just how his nature. But I have found that if I stop exercising, my libido goes down, even if I skip a day. And I with the program I do with these other dads, I say to them, look, yes, you are married or you have a partner, you got kids or whatever, but you got to remember that you are a couple. And I think the couple comes before everything else, because you're the rock of the family, both of you together. And what bonds you more than anything is having sex. The what I've heard from other lads saying is that and maybe this is an effect of pornography, but their view of like having sex, especially younger lads, is very kind of transactional and almost like it can be kind of quick and on the, on spontaneous. But generally women, especially if she's a mother and she's just put the kids to bed and she's in that mum mode, you've got to woo her. Yeah. She
can't change gears just like
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
She'd still be thinking of the shopping list and her work and whatever's happening with the kids. It was just like, no, it's too much.
Exactly, yeah. So you have to have that nurturing side, and do that. But as a fella, I was reading into this about erections and how I used to think an erection was just, and I could be wrong here, but was just the blood goes to that area, it stays there, and then it goes away. But what I heard, and maybe I don't know if this is true, but it's basically a constant flow. So when the penis gets filled with blood, it keeps flowing into that area. And this is why I say to fellas, look, every day do something. You don't have to be lifting weights. You could do jiu-jitsu, you cycle, you could run, something to get the blood moving around the body working as a unit. Because then think about it, when you have sex, that's a physical act that involves sometimes like lifting and carrying maybe, or like, you know, moving.
Well, it's a more active thing. Let's be frank, it is more active for the male.
It depends how much effort you're putting in, I suppose. But the bottom line is, if you exercise and even just do 10-15 minutes, you'll be amazed what it would do for libido. Yes. And this, we talked about this earlier about environment. Like trying to exercise at home when the kids are jumping on you is a disaster.
It's really difficult,
You're not playing with the kids properly. You're kind of ignoring them. You get frustrated. You're not having a good session either. So pay the money, 30 quid a month, whatever your gym membership is, and go to somewhere maybe like Westside Gym where the music's pumping and you can remember that you are, you know, you go into kind of, as I say, like beast mode.
Yeah, this is the other side of you.
Yeah, because at home you're the nurturing, caring, patient dad and husband, but then you need to tap into that more animalistic side of you. Because then when you have sex, that's what comes out.
Yeah, and it's so key because it affects testosterone levels. So because obviously I'll be seeing the bloods of all the clients that I'm working with, and it's quite interesting actually. I spoke to an andrologist about this before. That's just a doctor who specializes in male health, and he was saying how frustrating it is for him seeing the blood results, because the range for testosterone is really quite broad. It goes from about 8 to about 22 depending on the lab assay method. So, you know, I had a guy recently and his level was 8.5, so it hadn't been flagged because it was within the 8.5,
and it can be up to 1,000.
No, it can be up to 22.
Oh, 22, sorry.
22 in this particular assay method.
Okay.
So that would be the standard one. I'm trying to remember what the actual measurement is, whether it's PMOLs, I can check. But so basically his was very low in terms of the range, but it hadn't been flagged as such because it was technically still within the reference. And I was trying to explain to him, which is what this andrologist was saying to me, that he's working with guys in their 30s and 40s who he claimed had the testosterone of men in their 50s or 60s. In other words, he said anyone who's in their 30s or 40s should still have a testosterone well into the high teens. So, you know, should be like over 16, 17, and ideally around the 20 mark. The testosterone should be at its peak, not dropping off the wagon, unfortunately. And we see this because, exactly as you said, particularly for a father who has the firstborn and then life is busy, everything changes, and they're maybe struggling to have their second. And of course, what happens, herself goes off for her tests and thinks that, okay, it must be on my side. But actually, because of being sedentary, you know, sitting at the desk or then sitting on the couch in the evening, being clambered over by the child or just crashing into bed, you know, at 8 o'clock because that's all you have the energy for. Unfortunately, this becomes like a vicious circle where the lack of movement, the lack of exercise, and particularly resistance training, because obviously the muscle mass is so important for the testosterone, and guys have a daily output of testosterone. So in the morning is when their testosterone should be at its peak. Hence why, actually, if you're talking about timing to conceive, the morning time is usually better for the guys, even though it might be the case that they don't get the opportunity until the evening. So it's important to be mindful of that whether it be getting out, going for a walk in the morning, even just getting the sunlight on your eyes to sort of get the balance of melatonin, sleep hormone, which again will affect your circadian rhythm and testosterone, that if you can do some morning training or even do something like bringing the kids, you know, or firstborn to the park, and you're on the rings or you're on the, I mean, I've seen many guys do that. They're like, right, well, I'm just going to do some pull-ups on the monkey bars while my child is on the seesaw, because where else are you going to fit it in? If we have this attitude that you must have to have your big bag of gym gear and disappear to the gym for 3 hours, it's just not going to happen. You have to learn to be speedy. And I remember even when my kids were small, because it was a struggle, and I was saying this to a client the other day because she's trying for her third, and herself and her partner, they're both struggling with fitness. I'm like, well, whenever you're down, you know, changing a nappy, lean forwards, do a little push-up as you give them a kiss, you know, or if you're in the kitchen, it's just like do some squats while holding them, throwing them in the air, giving them a hug. Like, you have to find the ways of making it easier for yourself, because otherwise it's just not going to happen and you're going to suffer the consequences. Yeah,
and I think a big problem is seeing things on social media that seem so unrealistic. Like, you see, this is a day in the life of me, and I say I wake up at like a minute before my alarm, and then I meditate for 10 minutes, then I have a green juice, and then I, you know, get the sun in my eyes, and then I do an ice bath, and then I work out for 2 hours, and then I do. It's like personally speaking, I wake up when the babies wake up.
Get every shred of sleep.
Then I drag myself to the coffee machine while trying not to wake the wife up.
Yes.
And then I take the kids out to the gym. I'm lucky to have a gym in my house, or a separate to the house, out here. And I put on Winnie the Pooh while I try and squeeze a 20-minute workout in, maybe, before they get restless. That's the reality. But as you said, like, if you could do 5 minutes in the park, and sometimes you think like, oh, it's I'm not doing my hour workout or 45 minutes, but that's all going to add up. And again, with social media is there's body dysmorphia for fellas.
Yeah.
Like, you think to yourself, okay, I've got a dad bod, the belly, as it were, and then I want to get in shape. And you look online and you see guys that are on steroids. They're on
100%.
Testosterone replacement. They're on that. And even last year, Jessica, I was at a gym, or I won't say where, and there's lads in their 20s on testosterone.
Yeah.
Like, talking about it openly. What does that do for your fertility?
Great question. And it's such a huge problem. I mean, what you touched on there with social media, that's huge. So we really have to acknowledge, like, you put into the terms, the highest category of risk would be like teenage girls, let's say, is who we'd be most concerned about. But we can't ignore everybody else. So it's not just females, it's obviously guys as well, who are seeing these examples of, what's it called? It's like hyper masculinity, and thinking, oh, great, so I'm failing at life already. There's no point in even trying. And it's just such nonsense. And so when you're talking about the steroids and testosterone, I've actually seen that increasingly so, because it does seem to be amongst a younger demographic. And what I'll often hear is they'll admit, oh yeah, I had my sort of CrossFit training phase, and yeah, maybe I did some steroids, but that was years ago, so that's fine. They don't realize the long-term impact it has, dependent on obviously dosage and how long they take them for. And actually that was something I was talking about with that andrologist as well, because he would see that being a huge problem. You shouldn't be taking testosterone unless you're under medical care. That's that simple. And unfortunately now at the black market, it's very easy for people to get their hands on it. I know, because I've spoken to people who are doing it. I'm like, well, did you do your bloods first? Do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you understand the interplay between testosterone and DHEA and your free androgen index? They don't know. So it's you're playing with fire if you start doing that, because for a couple of reasons. Steroids will obviously hamper gonadal function. So we know that. I mean, that's widely known. I think even in the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary, he was talking about that. So you don't want to be messing with steroids. It also, to be frank, doesn't actually do much for your performance in terms of physical strength performance. It's purely visual for the most part. Oh. So just because you're able to crank out 1 more or 2 more reps, you're not actually getting as good functional strength. And they've looked at that in the research. So people think that, it's making them, really strong. But overall and over time, it's not. And it will undercut your performance over time because of the impact of steroids, because we're not supposed to be taking them long term unless you've got an autoimmune condition. And then there's the testosterone. So again, if you're giving your body testosterone, what do you think the message is going to be for the brain to the testes? It's going to be like, oh, we don't need to make testosterone anymore because we're receiving it. It's already coming in. So then if for whatever reason they stop it suddenly, it's like pulling the carpet from under them, and they will notice big impact on their overall health. And in fact, huge depression. That's one of the most common symptoms.
When you stop taking it.
Yes, if you suddenly stop testosterone, it's put people into a black place where they just can't cope at all. Their moods, they hit rock bottom, essentially. And then therefore they feel like, well, I can't be off it. I have to go back on. And they just don't understand the nuance and how much goes into it in terms of their overall hormonal health and nutrient levels and training and sleep and everything. So unfortunately, they're relying on the drugs instead.
The thing about even if it doesn't give you strength, as you said, extra strength, looking impressive is a marker to attract the woman. So like, it's so hard to like have a career in your 20s and make money. Right. Yeah. But if you and having a good career or a good job title or a nice big car or a house, I'm not going to get that in Ireland anytime soon. No. That's going to signal to a woman, okay, this guy has resources, he's capable. But it's so much easier just to inject something. And if you look impressive, like some women will think he has discipline, right? Yeah. He can stick to something. He's healthy. Yeah. He can protect me even though I don't need it in modern society, but I still taps into that hard wiring of protection. And all he has to do is just inject himself. And so you're going to get admiration from fellas, attraction from ladies, maybe. And but that shortcut, as you said, is going to maybe lead to long-term. Would it be long-term infertility, or can you get it back?
No, it can be long-term. It depends again on for how long they were doing it, the dosage, and the particular physiology of that person in terms of the impact it would have on their gonadal function. But yes, I've seen cases where they're attending me now in their 30s and 40s, but they would have done it in their 20s, and they're still struggling to get back to where they were before. You know.
You see, as a dad, you that's kind of that world is foreign. Because I do jiu-jitsu and I'm around a lot of younger lads, right? So I hear them talking amongst themselves. But with dads, you find yourself in this kind of haze, as you know, like really young kids, and you're not sleeping. So then you wake up, and because you're not sleeping, you want energy. You want energy, you get the energy from food. And the food you get it from is ultra processed. And then because you eat ultra processed food, you don't want to exercise. You can't. And then because you're not doing that, then you're not sleeping. And it becomes that cycle, right? So you have to break that cycle. And therefore, and I've noticed this with the lads I train as well, you have to be honest with yourself and say, like Jessica, I do this for a living, right? My job is to be fit and healthy because I teach health and fitness. But still, and I've got a brilliant, amazing wife. I still have to negotiate with her sometimes. I go, Rach, can I take half an hour to exercise? And I feel like I'm taking the piss, and it's a luxury. But
it's critical.
Yeah. So this is actually every Sunday I do like a round table with the other dads, and this Sunday what topic I'm going to talk about is reframing your mindset to be like, this is not a luxury. This is a necessity for you, for your wife, and for your kids, and then maybe for your grandkids. Yeah.
I don't think people understand quite how important it is. I mean, I know that my focus is fertility, but honestly, if I had a second career choice, it would be fitness. There's no question, because that's how passionate I am about it. I always have been since I was a teenager. I was into fitness, but I didn't understand at that time the difference between fitness and health. So what you were saying about the look, it demonstrates that the discipline, but it belies what's actually going on underneath the surface. Because I've seen people who are super fit but aren't healthy and are struggling with their fertility. I've seen triathletes, I've seen semi-pro athletes, actually. I've seen MMA fighters, as in on the female side as well, because their periods have gone. And similarly for the guys as well, because of the testosterone and the steroids. And what people don't realize is that what you're doing now in your 30s and 40s genuinely is going to impact you for your 50s, 60s and beyond. You are literally, it's like laying the foundations of a house. And it's something which, I mean, I know what you were saying there about finding the time. That conversation is something I have with my husband every Sunday. It's like, right, this is our week ahead. What's your week like? Right, so these 2 days I'm getting to the gym at this time. You collect the kids, I'm doing this. So it's where we start from, and everything builds around it. And yes, there are occasions, like sometimes at my work, because I run programs, fertility programs, it might be a particularly intense 2 weeks. So yeah, I might only get out for walks or something for that time frame, but that's rare. Like if you're looking at the course of the whole year, I know that, I'm pretty much 90% on consistency, and the 10% might be off if there's busy times or Christmas or whatever. So it's understanding that it is and supposed to be a part of lifestyle. And for those who aren't, in fact, I was speaking to a client the other day, and is explaining to her about her low testosterone, because it affects women as well. Yeah. And I was saying that, listen, you need to be doing more of the resistance training. You need more strength work. None of this just endlessly doing cardio. And she's like, oh, I know. I just don't really enjoy that type of workout. So if you don't enjoy that, you need to find ways of making it more fun. Doing, certain kind of boot camp style classes or something that includes it, but it feels more invigorating and less boring for you. Because let's be honest, counting out reps for people can be boring. It depends on your mindset. For me, I love putting on the headphones and listening to music, and I'm in the zone. Yeah. So that's my time. So I've no problem doing it, but I appreciate for others it can be boring. And in fact, when I think back, probably my late teens, early 20s, I remember looking at the gym thinking, that's boring. Yeah. So why would I do that? I'd rather play sport where I'm running after a ball. There's a purpose, So you have different phases of your life, let's say. But I think when you look at the stuff that you go back to, because we were talking earlier, I'd done yoga since I was 18, and that's always something I incorporate at the end of my training practice just to make sure I'm still mobile, getting older. So it's not just about, I just want people to understand, it isn't just about being big and strong. You want to have the balance of all the aspects. So it's the strength, but you also want the explosivity, you know, so you want to be able to like jump onto a box, you want to still be able to move. And people think of this as just visual. But, you know, if we're talking to dads out there, I mean, have you ever seen those videos? There's some of these amazing videos online where, you know, a child is about to encounter a dangerous situation. Like I remember seeing one of the kids on a tricycle and is about to have a head-on collision, and the dad sprints down and saves the child, right? So there are those moments, and I've seen them happen. You know, my husband saved our son from nearly, almost would be like a spearhead tackle. He nearly fell head first off a high slide from the top, and my husband saved him. I remember thinking, you know, would someone else have been able to do that? Yeah. But he moved fast and he's strong, so he was able to save him. So I think, not to sound too primal about it, but there is a reason for this. It goes above and beyond visuals. It is about practicality, functionality, how you live your life. And frankly, the fact that muscle tissue affects everything in our brain function, our mood, you know, our cravings, it's everything.
But I think it's like that lady, that patient you're talking to, or person you're working with, saying how she doesn't want to do the weightlifting. I think it's so important to remember that, like, say you did yoga for years, right? And a big part of yoga is meditation. But I have found loads of fellas that I meet, including me, don't like meditating. Like, actually, meditating doesn't just... it doesn't relax us, it actually makes us more stressed. I'm like, I should be able to sit still. I should be able to not think. But in fact, what can be therapeutic for me, definitely, I love resistance training. It's therapeutic. And jiu-jitsu, I mean, forget about it. Like, when I do jiu-jitsu, I leave, and although I'm like still low in the rankings, when I leave, I'm like, I want to tell the world, you know, because because as you said that about being primal, being normal life is actually strange, but things like jiu-jitsu, having sex, dancing for no reason, you know, whatever. That sounds like, you know, like dance like no one's watching. Love like you've never been hurt.
But it is more inherent in us.
But that's actually like natural. And that should be considered to be normal. So when I say to Rach, I'm going to work out, there's many reasons why, but one, it's therapeutic. I feel like, you know, you're breathing, you're moving, you can like visualize the muscle working and the blood, you feel the blood flowing. It's amazing. I think because when I was younger, I used to party a lot and do a lot of illegal, like kind of thing, you know, like
fun things,
alcohol plus other stuff, right? That like exercise gives me that. And I've actually met so many people that are like, used to be big party heads back in the day, and now they're like into spin class.
To get the same high.
Well,
you're absolutely right, and it's just there's a few things you touched on there, because I know we were talking beforehand a number of years ago, because my whole family did jiu-jitsu, as in my husband and kids and myself, but I stopped just because of the time frame and getting injured, which doesn't suit my work. But something you said there made me think of, I remember for the warm-up for jiu-jitsu, you'd start at the top of the mat, and you're having to do like animal walks and forward rolls and cartwheels and things that I would have always done because I'm just basically a kid at heart. But I was watching adults just look on in horror, going, what? This is what I did in kindergarten. I can't do this. And I realized how much we lose our sense of self as we get older. Because it's this idea of, you know, to be grown up, you shouldn't play, you know, but in so doing, we're actually losing our physical self completely and just being rigid, you know, going from the car where we're rigid, sitting into a desk, and there's no fluidity, there's no movement in our life. So that's why when we're talking about exercise or the gym, I would often use the term movement with people and just say, look, it's actually about being in your body. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're doing jiu-jitsu. Or anything, rock climbing, for example, people describe the same high, because it's just you in that moment, and you must be present. You must be present, because if you're not when rock climbing, you'll fall off the cliff face. If you're not in jiu-jitsu, you'll have to tap out, you'll get caught. So it's really important to bring something like that into your life. And often I think the training getting in the, with your programs, just getting in the short, intense bursts of training, that really is more like laying the foundation for then doing what else you love, what else you want to do. It's not that you have to be falling in love with the type of training. It's understanding the difference that is going to make to your health, to your lifespan, to your fertility, to everything. The whole thing connects.
Yeah, lifespan as well. I just finished Outlive by Peter Attia, and he talks about like the last decade of your life and what will that be like. And I see my dad, who built this thing we're sitting in, right? Yeah. He built it from, like your dad, he can build from the floor to the roof. Yeah. And he do the electrics, he did the plumbing, he did everything. I just carry stuff. But I see him now with my kids, and he's able to get on the ground and pick them up, throw them in the air and all this kind of stuff. He's 74. And I said to my dad the other day, Dad, do you ever have back pain? You ever had any bad back pain? Never. And he shoveled and dug his whole life. Whereas I'll meet lads in their 20s, and myself included, I get a stiff back, right? And this is there's a few reasons for this, but like it could be diet, but like it's not just lack of it, but also the same type of movements. That's the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu, is the versatility and how like the variety in the movement itself. But I do think like this can't be, as you said it, you kind of reframed it as movement. Yes. Because when you say exercise or gym, it feels like something you have to do.
Feels like a chore.
Maybe it's the same way of people like, okay, I've got a smiley face on my my thing, whatever, well, let's go and have sex. It becomes like mechanical or transactional.
Yes, completely.
Whereas you got a wife, and speaking to the fellas or missus, you got to dance with her, like in the kitchen, like yesterday me and Rachel puts on some tunes, we're just dancing around, like messing about, wrestle around with the missus. Like I don't wrestle with her that much, but I wrestle with the kids, and just keeping that side of yourself, because it's a bit like you said earlier, if you start thinking like you're old, you will become old.
Yes, very much so. It's so funny you say that. I remember dealing with a couple, and this is back pre-COVID, so they were sitting in the chairs in front of me, because now I'm fully online, but he was kind of slumped down in the chair, like it was a very, even just his physical positioning. And we were talking through everything. He said, "Oh, well, I suppose, I'm getting old now. I'm 37. I said, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "No, you're not." Like, it's such a mindset thing. And I think in our society in particular, like when I think back to when I was training over in China, I was working in a hospital there back when I was doing acupuncture. And the running joke when I was speaking to people in the hospital was that I could not guess anyone's age correctly. And the doctors found this hilariously funny. So they'd be like, so what age is this patient? I'm like, I don't know, 52, 83. I'm like, this is insane. And it's because of what do they do in their society that's different to ours? Because that's what I was trying to analyze. First off, there's the respect. And I do think this has a role to play in terms of the respect of each other, respect of environment, just kind of a dignity to what they would do in terms of respecting how they prepare their food, to their routine during the day. There was one guy I remember speaking to who was 83 and was giving out that he was starting to lose the quality of the sight in his left eye. He did not use glasses. He was 83, no glasses. He had all his own teeth. I mean, I can't think of anyone in Ireland, I think, who would be in that position. And I said to him, "So what do you do?" And he was very chuffed that I was interested. And he said, "Well, I get up in the morning and I meet my friend in the park and we do Tai Chi. We play chess together, for the brain. We have a bowl of rice and vegetables." And, just everything was just so set and natural to them in the way that they would live their life during the day. So, and riding a bike, so the natural movement in the day was inherent in what they do. And that obviously has a big impact on longevity.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like we're kind of artificially putting movement in, and that therefore it seems like a chore. Yeah. But the other part of what you mentioned about that older man is that he met his friend in the park.
Yes.
Right? With
community.
Fellas tend to like just keep themselves. My dad has no friends. He won't mind me saying that.
No, my dad's the same.
He's Billy no mates.
but yeah, friendly with everyone.
So, but it doesn't seem to bother him, and maybe it doesn't. So more power to him. But I think for most people that's not a good.
No, I think community is key. There's no question that we do better. Now, there can be balance to this. Of course, if you're meeting your mate and you just end up chatting for hours and you don't actually get any exercise done, then that can be a problem too. We've all been there. But I see it in the gym. Like I'd see, like teenage boys always seem to train in packs together, probably just from insecurity and kind of finding their bearings. But there's these two guys actually in my local gym who'd often say hello to me because they train at the same time in the afternoon. And they're probably, one of them is about 60, the other one is close to 70, but both super fit. And when talking to them, their history is like they used to be personal trainers and everything. And they're just the best. It's like the ultimate bromance. Do you know what I mean? Like the two of them are just there supporting each other and like, you know, spotting each other for lifts. And it's that consistency. You can see that if one is there, the other one's going to show up so as not to let his mate down. Yeah. And I just think that's really important, that if we could understand that if we have that friendship thing there to it. And of course, if you want your alone time, that's fine too. But I just think then it's more enjoyable. Then you're going to make it a part of your life. It's not going to seem like a chore. Yeah,
but we are talking about exercise a lot. But I like from Outlive the book by Peter Thiel, he says with diet, it's a bit up in the air. We don't really know like what diet is best to follow, and it can depend on your lineage or your ancestry. True. And what suits your body. Some people can eat certain foods, they have diarrhea, some they get constipated, but so we can't be 100% certain about diet, but most certainly exercise, resistance training, as you said, not overdoing it but doing enough that you're getting that stimulus where it's nice and intense. I just think for dads, it's something that when they stop playing football at 35 because of the knee or the back, whatever, then they think, okay, now my life is I'm the dad, and I identify as the dad, and I pay, you know, say like if their role in the family is to pay the bills, mortgage, it's like they kind of become they almost become like the third child, or you know, and the mum is like she's really in charge. I mean, I noticed with my wife, like, she'll ask me a question about something, and then I'll give my opinion, and I'm like, we're just going to do what she says. If it's to do with the kids and the family, it's like she's the boss, basically, right? Because she generally knows better than I do about how to run the family, which is fine. But you got to remember, like, not to get lost, and remember who you are and what made you attractive to her in the first place.
Yes, that's such a valid point. And I know, because we were talking about this beforehand, because I'm that little bit ahead just in terms of the age of my kids, because they're teenagers now. But what you said there, you know, about, they give up and stuff. My husband had hurt himself playing hockey years ago. So then he moved to cycling, and that was fine. But then when the kids came along, so I remember he was about 32, because he's 43 now, and he would have started jiu-jitsu at that point at 32. So the kids were young. So my daughter would have been, about 5 or 6, and my son was about 3. And he was just... it was like a duck out of water, you know. It was so alien to him, and he'd come home a sweaty mess, not knowing what was going on, probably with a graze over his eye, and I was like, what are you doing with this jiu-jitsu thing? And he's like, no, seriously, I think it could be good for me. And it was because it brought him back to himself. And I think this is really important to say for guys, that how you identify in yourself, in your place in the world and your role, because what you said there about, you know, it often can fall that it's more the maternal provider who's kind of running the show, taking care of the kids. It can be hard for guys, and I think we do really need to acknowledge that, because much like with fertility, when I'm speaking to a couple, and then if there had been sperm issues discovered, I'm having to remind the guy, like, look, this is okay, this isn't a blame game, this isn't on you. This is just a biological thing we've got to address. And it's the same thing with your fitness, getting back to that. It is bringing you back into your sense of self. And I often joke with my husband that the 10 years he's done jiu-jitsu for is him going from a boy to becoming a man. You know, it really was that transition for him. And equally, he was great for me when I'd had the kids. So I'd had my son at 29, and I just was all about the kids and doing nothing else for myself. And he signed me up for summer hockey. I hadn't played hockey since I left school. So this is like 12 years later. I was going, Jesus, how am I going to do this? But then I got on and it's like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah. But I wouldn't have done it for myself. So I think especially in a relationship, what you said, that kind of, and everyone has those arguments, you know, the sort of the tit for tat of like, who's going to get to go, and well, I did this week, so you have to do this next week. You know, you have to be really careful of that, because the last thing you want in a relationship is to become like griping with each other. So that's why it's really important if you call it out beforehand. predict the week ahead and say, look, okay, I've got a really rough week with work, so can I pencil in this time, you know, so I can have that. And I would have had the same conversations with my husband, because jiu-jitsu, you know, goes on for hours. So I'd be like, listen, here's the time. So you have 2.5 hours, get back.
Yeah.
But if you have that conversation, then you'll be able to create the balance, and it won't become this source of contention, you know, because that's the last thing you want.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of silently resent each other.
Yes, yes, it's awful.
It is awful, yeah, and that will build up. But then this is where sex comes in, because it's like when you're having sex fairly regularly, you notice that tension just melts away.
Totally melts away the tension. But that's where that comes down to the communication between men and women is so key. Because obviously, as you said earlier, you know, if a woman is just had a busy day, and, you know, whether it be a home life dealing with the kids or work life, whatever it might be, they're not just going to switch into that mode. And that's the difference, obviously, with the different testosterone levels, which fellas have. And incidentally, something I see a lot in the fertility world, which women don't realize. The women that I see who are stressed out tend to have low testosterone. And they don't realize that women need testosterone. In fact, this is an interesting one. We have more testosterone relative to estrogen.
Than men?
No, not than men.
Sorry.
Within ourselves, within our body.
The ratio.
Yes, we actually have more testosterone. And women are shocked by that. They assume that we're estrogen dominant all the time. We're not. So when we've really low testosterone, it affects everything. It affects the lust for life, libido. It affects even motivation and work. So how I put it to a client the other day, because I got her results back and her testosterone is like 0.2. And I said, so tell me, are you feeling that, you know, to quote the medical word, a bit meh? And, you know, and she said, yeah, that's exactly how I'm feeling about life at the moment. I just feel totally apathetic, like nothing is getting me interested. I'm just flat, completely flat. And I said, that is your testosterone. And that is why the weight training is so important for the females as well as the guys, because that's how the women are going to meet the fellas with their libido, so that they're actually going to be able to be on the same page and not leading to these arguments, you know? Yeah.
So if there was like a list of things that fellas could do to make their sperm count
better,
what would they be?
Well, before I get into the list, very quickly, just want to outline for your listeners that they understand, it's not just about the sperm count, okay? So in a semen analysis, it'll tell you the volume, so how much semen, the count, and the important number is in millions per milliliter. So you want that ideally for non-assisted conception above 40 or 50, not just over 15. Okay, the 15 threshold is for IVF or ICSI. ICSI is where they inject the sperm. Then you have the motility, how well the sperm can actually swim. So you want total motility and progressive motility to be good. So in other words, how well the sperm are swimming, not just that they're casually swimming. So that should be at least around the 32 to 40% mark. And then you have the morphology, which is the shape of the sperm. So that's what you're getting in a semen analysis, and the sperm DNA frag is telling you the quality. So if you want to improve all of those things, the count, motility, morphology, and the DNA frag, I would recommend the following. So as a base, so these are what I call the non-negotiables. Sleep. Sleep is a priority. If you don't have good sleep, you won't have good sperm. You won't do well with your training. You won't, you'll be craving 3 coffees before it's even noon. It's just not good. I can see the guilty look. So yeah, sleep is key. Now, obviously, if you have young children, we know that can be a challenge. So that's where there can be the sort of tit for tat, where you're saying, right, okay, could you be on night duty this night so that I can get a more, a span of sleep time? Because if you're sleeping anything under about 7.5 hours, in the research they've shown that can impact the sperm. So it's across the board. So sleep is the foundation. Then if you're talking about diet and lifestyle, that is really important. So when I talk about diet, it's not just about the what you eat, but when you eat. So as guys, definitely try to avoid starting the day with coffee without eating something as well first. Now, guys are a bit different to women in the sense that because of their testosterone surge, they have a simpler daily cycle with the hormones, they can get away with the intermittent fasting a bit more. So fair enough, if they're having the coffee only, if they're going straight to the gym, if they're moving, that's cool. But if you're having the coffee to sit down at your desk, not ideal. because you're stimulating the body, you're affecting, it's affecting, your insulin levels and blood sugar balance. So you're going to release blood sugar, or sugar into the blood, I should say, so that your body can use it, but you're not doing anything. You're sitting at your desk. So, and what's the classic thing with dads? The dad bod, the fat around the middle, that you're just going to get those girdles because it's going to store it there, thinking, well, you're not doing anything. So have the coffee if you're going to train or going out for a walk, but if you're just sitting at a desk, I'd hold off on the coffee maybe until mid-morning. Hydration, obviously really important too. A lot of guys just don't really think of this, but remember, depending on body mass, so size, and how active you are, like usually for most people, it needs to be a minimum of 2 to 3 liters, and if a guy is sweating a lot, if he is training, then it could go as high as 4, or if not 5, depending on the size of the guy. So just be very mindful of that. And hydration, remember, with water or with herbal teas, but that's distinct from coffee. Coffee doesn't get counted in that. Not that, coffee is bad, it isn't, but certainly going beyond really more than 2 cups a day is where I usually see it causes problems for people, because they're relying on that instead of water, and then they're just relying on it to stimulate them. And so they're on this high, but actually underneath it all, if you took away their coffee, someone says, I have plenty of energy. And I'm saying, sure, cool. So if I took away your coffee, how much energy do you have? And suddenly they're like, oh, no, terrible. So that would be foundational. And then within the diet, if you're talking about protecting the sperm, you want to have as many antioxidants as possible. Simplest way to do that for most people is have a smoothie. It's easy, it's quick. You can throw in your protein powder if you're going to the gym. You can cram in celery, kale, whatever works. I wouldn't try broccoli, it's too bitter. But berries for antioxidants, it's an easy way of getting it in that you don't have to think about the cooking. And obviously when the weather is colder, you can still do that. Throw in a bit of ginger, it warms you up, or have it maybe later in the day if you've had porridge or something more warming first. But certainly we can't overlook that. I think we live in a society now that's so protein obsessed. And don't get me wrong, I love my protein. In fact, my daughter has in WhatsApp written my name as "Eat Your Protein." that's my mum number. And so, eat your protein is very important, but we can't forget the importance of the fiber, the fruit and veg, and the antioxidants that come with it, because it's those micronutrients, we call them, the vitamins, minerals, as opposed to the macros, the protein, carbs, fats, that really make a difference to protecting the sperm from what's known as reactive oxygen species, or oxidative stress, which is unstable molecules attacking other molecules. And that's essentially what causes a chain reaction that causes damage. It's the same thing that causes aging in our cells. So you need to have the fruit and veg in there. And remember, the 5 a day is actually the minimum. 5 a day was never aspirational. 5 a day was enough to avoid deficiency of vitamins and minerals. Yeah, when I see people, they don't realize that actually you need to be hitting more like 7 to 9. So if you can break that up during the day by saying to yourself, okay, in each meal, okay, if I had the smoothie, or if I had like the fruit with breakfast, then I'll have, maybe carrot sticks and hummus for a snack, just find ways to fit it in during the day would be a good plan.
Okay. And then what about fat, like obesity? How does that affect, what's a healthy range body weight or percentages?
So this is an interesting one. When you're talking about BMI, right? So body mass index, as most people are taught, is really actually quite a poor barometer. So for example, if I were weighed, I would probably be in higher BMI because of muscle mass. So I weigh way more. I was 57 or 58 kilos when my daughter or son was born. I'm trying to remember back. I'm now 67. I still wear the same clothes. So that's a difference of nearly 10 kilos. My composition has completely changed. Yeah. So I think for men and for women, we have to understand, I've seen women in particular, but also men, be chastised, judged, prejudiced against, refused testing and fertility treatment based on their body size. Whereas if you actually looked at their body composition, like I had a woman before who did CrossFit, she could lift heavier than probably most guys that I would know. And she had huge body mass in terms of muscle mass as well as fat tissue. But she was being judged because of that, as opposed to having a proper understanding of the physiology. So I would rarely bring up or discuss, as it were, obesity in that sense. I would be far more interested in a person's blood work, how they're sleeping, how's their bowel function, are they passing daily, as opposed to twice a week, which is obviously far more problematic for health, and that their nutrient levels are on point and their hormones. Because frankly, if you're talking about weight gain, that'll come from very many different sources and reasons. So for someone might be injury, and that prevents them from exercising. So that's obviously a struggle. For others, I mean, it could be trauma. So, you know, I've seen women, for example, who would have suffered sexual trauma, and that would have led to weight gain. So I just think it's really important in that context that we're careful with how we phrase it. And just as a society as a whole, I think it's really important that we be less judgmental, you know, because people will be viewed as being the more successful, better person, literally a better person for being slimmer. And that's just nonsensical, you know.
I heard something. I used to think like language wasn't that important, and people would say like, you know, people live with obesity, and I think, oh, just they're obese. But then I realized that if you tell, like when I was in school, I was told I was thick because I was, you know, I would be like, if I was a kid now, they would say I have ADHD. Like they would say that, right? But most people would say, oh, Kev, he's a good laugh, but he's a bit thick. You know, I'm like, okay, I'm the thick guy that's kind of funny and a good laugh. So then you kind of reinforce that yourself and become that. So if someone says, oh, they're an obese person, they might think this is my fixed identity. But if you say someone living with obesity, it's kind of, what's the word, temporary, I suppose. You know, and
it's removing the personification from it.
Yeah, and I used to scoff at that and be like, oh, come on, let's like, not, this is so like progressive language.
2PC, yeah, I understand.
2PC, yeah. But actually, speaking for how that has affected me, it makes a big difference. Huge. And you know, people, if someone feels ashamed and they think I'm an obese person, what are they going to do? They're going to eat more, because that's their drug of comfort, their choice of comfort. So you know, it's the same way, like, you know, I was dating this girl once. I remember she was like, I went into town and she said, oh God, look at all these junkies. I remember her saying that, and it really stuck with me. I thought, I felt like repulsed by her saying that, because instead of saying these are people with addiction issues,
you need help,
and that could be you. That could be you on the street corner if you didn't have really good parents,
exactly,
or you weren't born in with your own house.
Yeah,
so like
privilege.
Yeah, exactly. So like you have to remember that in order for people to be helped, they feel empowered. I guess. And
supported completely. So yeah, it's multifactorial, because exactly what you touched on there. I mean, privilege can affect the access that people have to good quality food or fresh produce. I mean, goodness knows, we know the cost of everything now is just shot through the roof. So crazy. Of course, if people are going to be making a choice between things, they might go for something that's more processed and maybe just not have been given the knowledge that they would need in order to make good choices. But like I said, it can run very deep. It can be to do with hormonal issues like thyroid problems. It can make it very difficult for someone to shift weight, no matter what they're eating, no matter the calorie intake, because of the hormonal imbalance. And people need to understand that. It should never be the case that someone of a higher BMI is equated with being lazy. It's just such an awful term to use. And as you said, people carry that with them. It's like the difference between saying you're a bad child versus a child who did a bad thing. You know, we have to be mindful of our language. But yes, to go back to your original question, with BMI, for sure, yeah, in some of the research it has shown that it can impact sperm. But it's really across the board. So it's more about being too sedentary as opposed to just the BMI, that can have the impact. But really, it's the overall picture of someone's health is what matters the most. Yeah,
because you can be malnourished, you can be too skinny or too
absolutely,
like, you know, not have vitality, as it were.
There's some of the hardest cases actually is low BMI that I've dealt with. Yeah. They're the hardest. Yeah, low BMI in men and in women. Because first of all, in society, you're told you're perfect, you're wonderful, you're amazing. In fact, it's aspirational. But when I've seen those at very low BMI, they usually have malabsorption issues. So I had a guy before, and he just was giving out, it was as part of a couple trying to conceive, and he was giving out that he couldn't put on weight. And I said, and I had him do, it's a simple test I tell people, do a sweet corn test, basically eat it, see when you see it at the other end.
Oh, yeah.
His partner, because she had problems with constipation, she passed it like 72 hours later, so major problem there, but he, 8 hours, way too fast. His metabolism, he just wasn't absorbing anything. So I said, this is a problem. And it later transpired with further investigation that he'd actually picked up a parasite with traveling in South America that he had no idea about, and was impacting his health for years. So, you know, we have to understand that don't judge a book by its cover. You don't know what's going on underneath the surface. Yeah. And the same for women with very low BMI. They can lose their period, low estrogen issues. Yeah, it can be a problem.
Yeah, you got to take a holistic approach, I think, to like, so check your poo.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you're not having sex too regular, maybe masturbate.
Yeah.
You know, and then obviously there's diet and or nutrition, shall I say, and resistance training as well. Getting sleep is a fundamental, but yeah, I think that is something that if people start talking about a bit more male fertility, it become just like cholesterol.
Yes.
You know, and to move away from, you know, I've heard women say like if they can't have a baby, they don't feel like a woman. Same way, fellas, if they can't get like people will often joke, oh, he couldn't get it up.
Yeah,
like
awful.
I just read a statistic that in North America anyway, over the age of 40, 52% of men suffer from erectile dysfunction, right? So that's like more people do than don't if you're over 40, right?
It's that common.
Which is my demographic. I was thinking, I have to remember that I am older.
But back to what you said about blood flow, so true. So obviously, if someone is getting in movement and exercise, which is as good for their mental health as much as anything else, because remember, if you're talking about erectile dysfunction, there's often aspects of that coming from a mental health perspective because of maybe pressure with trying to conceive. You know, it's like, right, smiley face on the predictor kit, the ovulation predictor kit, must try. And the fella just kind of is like, this is too much pressure. And it is too much pressure. It's too much for any person to handle. So we have to understand that there's that aspect to it, but there's also the fundamental cardiovascular function, which is to do with nitric oxide, which is obviously a vasodilator, will help with vasodilation. It's essentially the same principle of what sildenafil Viagra would work on. And so you can include things within your diet, such as like beetroot or beetroot juice would be a natural way of getting more nitrates, which would be able to support your blood flow. And we've also seen that in the research that the more saturated fat you consume, the poorer the blood flow is. If you're talking to the gonad. So that's really important as well. Across the board, all the research has shown that the more Mediterranean diet, which is a bit more fish focused, more whole grains, fruit and veg, again, the protein is still important, but being mindful of having the good fats like olive oil, avocados, flaxseed, rather than just endless steak. You know?
What's interesting is I'm guilty of the endless steak thing, is that because we live in Ireland, we live on an island, a lot of people that I've met that are not from here will say, why don't you guys eat more fish here? You know, and the reason I looked into this is because if you own land, it means that you have money. So therefore, you can have cattle or livestock. So eating meat was seen as a luxury. So you'd eat as much as you could if you could afford to have meat. And fishing was seen as something peasants would do because anyone could do that. So that's the reason. And I also think like there's a machismo thing about like, oh, love me steak and eggs. And I'm guilty of this. I must say, like Rachel said to me, Kev, you're eating steak every day. You need to like chill at the steak. I'm like, you're probably right. Because too much of anything, I mean, too much water can drown you. So
exactly.
Too much of anything is not good. But I'm conscious of your time.
No, it's okay.
So
it's been great.
If people want to find you, where would they go?
They go to The Fertility Detective. I'm on Instagram, and obviously my website, jessicabourke.com, but Instagram is where I'd be most active and giving people info, and doing my Fertility Friday Q&A that I do every week where I give people advice, and then I've got my fertility programs as well that people can check out there too.
You're busy.
Yeah, I am.
Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you so much.